What about weight loss diets? Well, we've got so many of them. It's obvious that none of them work, or we have a slender population. And one of the benefits of having been in this industry for a long time is that we see the same ones. They come back about every 25 years, I reckon, or even more often for some of these things. So we've now got the people who say you've got to have high or low carbs or high or low glycemic index or whatever. Every diet works initially because every diet restricts something. And when you restrict things, you cut the amount of kilojoules you're consuming, and so you lose weight. There is no mystery. There is no mystery to why people lose weight, but very few of these diets work long term, partly because people can't stick to them. With some of the really wacko ones, I'm very happy about that, or their health would suffer. So that when we look at the population getting fatter and going on various diets, they simply do not work long term, but any of them work short term. The problem with some of the diets that work dramatically quickly, so people say, oh, the weight just fell off with that diet, lost 4 kilograms in a week or something. You cannot burn off 4 kilograms of fat in a week. And when you lose even 1 kilogram, it's in a week, what's happening is your fluid intake is going up and down. About between 60 and 70% of the body is fluid. And you can make that go up and down. And the way you do this is you go on a diet that has very low levels of carbohydrate. And you have a substance called glycogen stored in your muscles, and every gram of glycogen is stored with 3 grams of water. And so if you don't have any glycogen is what you use for physical activity. If you go out running, you'll burn it all off in about 2 hours. If you're just sitting around and walking around, it might take 2 days. But if you're not eating any carbohydrate to replenish your glycogen in your muscles, the levels will go down and the water with it. So you get on the scales and you weigh less. But you haven't lost fat. What you've lost is water and glycogen. If you continue with the diet for a few days longer, you will start losing some fat. But basically, when you lose weight fast, it returns fast as soon as you can no longer stay on that diet. So what you need is a diet that you can stick to for a very long time. So I don't like people going on diets. The only diet book I've ever written was a book on rating the diets, in which I didn't give any of them very many good marks. The only diet I don't mind so much at the moment, if people follow it properly and actually read the book, is the 2 days of fasting, not actually fasting, the 2+5 diet. It's written by a doctor, Michael Mosley, and if you actually read his diet, he says on the 5 days you eat really quite sensibly. You choose foods from the food groups and you eat normally, and then 2 days a week you don't eat very much. It's 500 calories a day for women and 600 for men, which means basically lots of vegetables, maybe an egg or two and a slice of bread. The only reason I think it's good is that very often people these days eat so often that they don't actually ever feel gut-rumbling hunger, because they're eating all the time. So when I say to somebody, what's your hungry time of the day? I can tell you exactly when my hungry times of the day. I wake up hungry and I have something to eat, and in about an hour or two my tummy will start rumbling again because I'll be hungry because I'll have used up my breakfast. But when people say, well, I don't know, I'm always hungry, what they mean is I always feel like eating. And that's perfectly nice. I'm not complaining about that. But sometimes they don't ever go long enough to actually let their stomach get empty. And so they do learn that on that diet, that the 5-2 diet. The problem is, and one of my very dear friends, who's quite rounded, very rounded actually, but as he says, you don't have to be thin to be my friend, which is perfectly true. He was following this diet, and he says the night before he's going to have his fast diet, we play tennis together, and we usually go to the local restaurant on Sunday nights and eat, and he says, oh, I've got a fast day tomorrow, I better have dessert. And I keep saying, that's not going to work, and it isn't working, obviously. So if you do it wrongly, it doesn't work. But actually what he has found is that on his day when he's not having very much to eat, he actually has discovered what it feels like to have an empty tummy. And he's discovered also that if you actually get a rumble in your tummy, you don't die. Especially when there's food around for the next day. So maybe that diet does work. There are some studies going on at the moment, and they're looking at a little bit promising, but only if you do it properly, and many people don't. The real problem is that when you go on a diet, it takes away your attention from what you really need to do, which is find something you can live with. You've got to do something forever. You can't just do it for a few weeks. and then go off it. That's actually can be worse for your health than just staying fat. Oops, sorry. Oops. I actually think that cutting back rather than cutting out works best. Whenever people say, okay, I'm never going to have another dessert, I'm never going to have... It doesn't work, you know. Eventually it's somebody's birthday and you want to have it, or it's really special. I think it's better to cut down rather than out. If you're going to lose body fat, it's going to happen slowly. If you can lose 1 kilogram a month, you're doing well. In fact, when you look at people who follow those rapid weight loss diets like the Atkins diet or any of the high protein diets, they lose a lot of weight the first month or two and then they gradually put it on. And after a year, they're usually back to where they were, usually a little higher. If you look at them up to 18 months later, they're much fatter than they were in the first place. You've got to do it slowly, but even so, they don't go all that fast over the year. I've already mentioned that. And you've got to stop looking for a miracle. There isn't one. We just sit around too much and don't do it right. So you need a healthy diet you can follow forever. You need to change your exercise habits. I actually think that's the most basic thing to do. Even if it's only start slow. If you don't exercise normally, some aqua aerobics, some walking. I was really happy this morning. I went for a bit of a stroll out here and I saw so many people walking and running. I thought, oh, nice place to do it. I would like people to think about foods rather than nutrients. Rather than thinking you're going to go on a low-carb diet or a low-saturated fat or a high-fat diet or any of these sort of things, it really doesn't work, and I'll show you why in a minute. We need smaller portions of everything except vegetables, and especially less fat and sugar and alcohol. The reason why I don't think people should look at saturated fat is because these foods all contain exactly the same amount of saturated fat. And when people start telling me that saturated fat is good or bad, I say, well, look, if you look at those foods, what do they have in common? Pretty well nothing, except that they all contain the same amount of saturated fat. And when people say people on a low or a high saturated fat were healthier or not healthier or whatever, in some of these studies that don't look at the actual foods, they just look at these totals, were they sitting down to eat lard? Were they eating custard tarts? Were they eating cashews? I mean, really, these foods have nothing in common. We can go even further. People look at carbohydrate. Are you talking about lentils or lollipops? Because they're both carbohydrate foods. There's a huge difference between jelly beans and rolled oats, but they both contain carbohydrates. So when people go on a low-carb diet, they cut out the good carbohydrate foods as well as the bad ones. And the same with saturated fat. They really don't know what they're doing. What we did when we spent 4 years going through and formulating the most recent dietary guidelines, we looked at 55,000 pieces of research. It took 4 years to look at them all, I can assure you. What we decided that we needed to change the focus and talk about foods and food groups and eating patterns rather than components of foods. I think we also need to be very sceptical about who promotes various diets. Whenever I see some actress or model talking about some diet and everyone following it, I always think, why do they think these people know more about nutrition than people like me? Or else, look, those of us who spent 5 years at university doing this stuff and then more doing PhDs and things, we do know something about nutrition. Other people do a course that you pay for. It's not very difficult. Remember there was a Catalyst program on last year and they had various people saying saturated fat wasn't a problem. They had a nutritionist. I took one look at this guy, and look, I have to admit that this showed some bias, but here was this guy on ABC television who was the nutritionist. He had dyed blonde hair. He had his shirt open to his waist nearly with gold chains around his neck and a fake tan. And I thought, you don't look like any genuine nutritionist I've ever come across in 50 years. So it took me 30 seconds to Google him and discover his nutrition degree was exactly the same one that I bought for my old English sheepdog. It cost me $150 and I did it just to show how easy it was. Now, it was some years ago, for the sheepdogs passed on, I'm afraid. But you can actually buy these degrees from mail order universities, and that's what he had. And I immediately got onto the ABC. It took me 3 weeks after that program to keep writing things for the ABC and for various other people, for which nobody paid me. But it really was very annoying that they were using somebody, and the other people who were all selling particular supplements which were meant to take the place of other things which cardiologists had been recommending. So they had their own range of supplements, which they sold from their own offices. So the ABC should have checked that out and they didn't because a particular journalist sort of liked these people. But it really is a bit annoying when you think that these people pop up who really sort of may be very good at what they do. Now, I would be very bad as being a model or an actor or a celebrity. But I'm very good at being a nutritionist because it's what I do, it's what I study, it's what I've worked at for a very long time. So don't ask me about modelling because I'd be really bad at it, but don't ask models about nutrition either because they're not really good role models.